got a question from Lee, who is recently promoted in Jiu-Jitsu, and he's wondering about how to deal with this feeling of being an imposter. He says he doesn't feel like he's quite ready. He says there's people around him that are better than him that should have been promoted and they weren't. So he's like, I don't know why you picked me. How do I deal with this feeling of being an imposter? And is there any way to change the sort of the feeling that he has in his head? So Lee, first off, thanks for the question, brother. And I think that most of us at some point, if we haven't yet, we will feel like an imposter based on our promotions. A lot of times this just happens, especially at the blue belt level. I know that I felt that same way because the process happens so gradually. Because when I first came into it, right, I sucked. I didn't know what I was doing. I was inexperienced in jiu-jitsu, and then slowly but surely I got better. But that process happened so gradually that when I eventually got my blue belt, I didn't really feel like I was ready for it. And at the time, you got to remember that blue belts were a big deal back then because, you know, there were like a couple purples, a handful of blues. And so when I stepped up to that point, you know, in this area, it was a big deal. And again, when you first walk into the gym, like blue belts they're pretty good. They have a pretty good amount of baseline information and experience. And so when I got there, I felt very inexperienced. And I went to my first tournament, and I remember not feeling ready, and I lost my first match. And I remember getting so upset because I was like, see, I told you. I talked to my coach. I told you I wasn't ready. And then later on, I had some other matches, and I beat the people, and I was like, oh, maybe I was ready. Maybe I was just kind of being a little bit, you know, overly emotional or upset about it. And the whole process of this and this whole imposter thing, it kind of reminds me of when I lost weight when I was a kid, because basically when I was in 7th grade, I got jumped and got my nose broken, whatever. And because I didn't really want to go outside very often, so I went from being this young kid who was out exercising and riding his bike and doing all this stuff to being a kid who was like stayed indoors and didn't go outside very often. And because of that, I got really chunky. I got really big. When I went into high school, like at one point I was like 245, big chunky kid, right? And when I started getting into wrestling, I started to lose a little bit of weight, and I would wrestle at 215, and I would play football at about 235, something like that. And I remember like running upstairs one time, right? Like we were doing stairs before the state tournament. I wasn't going to go to state, obviously, because I wasn't good enough at that point. But I remember I would just work out with the guys just because it felt good to be on the team. And I remember one of the coaches saying, man, you'd be a monster at 189. That's a weight class, right? And so I was like, you think so? So then that became like the burning desire in my head. I want to get to that weight class. So I got online and I went to this website, this forum, and I got this plan for sort of meals and stuff like that. And I would take all the money that I made from the weekends busting table to buy food. I would go with my mom to the grocery store and buy food for myself. And over this course of the summer from junior to senior year, I lost like 35, 40 pounds. And then I wrestled at 189 the next year and had a much better year. Went to state, did the whole thing. Like I was good, right? I was much better at that weight class. And I felt great that I lost the weight. But the funny thing was, because that weight loss happened so gradually over several months, right? I didn't really feel different. And because I'd been a fat kid, my self-confidence, my own self was down for a long time. So I didn't really feel any different, right? I didn't feel like, oh man, I'm leaned out or I'm in like good shape. I still felt like a fat kid. And then it was people around me that would be like, no, you're not a fat cat. You've got abs going, right? Like you're not fat, even though I still felt that way. And I think that that's the way that it works from typically in jiu-jitsu, because the process of getting better is so gradual. A lot of times it takes a little bit of time at that point where you're at to sort of become okay with it or to sort of wrap your brain around it, right? Because like, for instance, with blue belt, when I got it, you know, it's like I'm training. And then there was one day where my coach was like, hey, I think you're ready. Here's your blue belt. And it even happened after like a really successful win at a tournament. I still didn't feel quite ready. But then over time, right, there's like a buffer, there's a little space of time. Over time, I felt like I belonged. And competing helped me out because obviously I sort of beat other people and sort of cemented to myself that I belonged. But I know, Lee, you said you don't really plan to compete. So what I would say to you, man, is to how to change your headspace. First off, understand that, again, as people, we typically are, a lot of us anyway, if you're like me, and it sounds like you're like me in some ways, we're overly critical of ourselves, right? Like you and I probably be with the same people that if we stood in the mirror and looked at ourselves, maybe before a date or a job interview or something like that, we would instantly start to pick apart all the negative stuff that we see, right? And likewise, if you're getting ready for, getting ready to roll, or when you're getting promoted or whatever, you're probably realizing all the imperfections you have in your game. Like, man, this part of my game sucks. I don't know how to do this very well. And you're just going down the negative stuff. And that's why it's really important to put your trust into this coach that you have, because they can look at you objectively. The people around you a lot of times can look at you more objectively than you can yourself, right? Because you're probably going to be more overly critical of yourself. So it's important to just sort of trust in that. You go to this guy for a reason, right? This man or woman who's your coach, you go to them for a reason. Put your trust in them, right? Say, hey, like, what do you think of me? And again, they're promoting you because they say that you were ready. Just trust in that, right? And understand that you're in your own head right now, and give it a little bit of time, and you'll start to wrap your head around the fact that you're where you belong. And again, I know you don't plan to compete, but if you ever do compete, it kind of helps out a little bit too. So I think that's it. Lee, I hope this helped. I know I kind of rambled all over the place, but again, I hope that helps you with your problem, brother. And again, thanks for the question. I'll talk to you guys next time.